Welcome to another American TESOL Presents Free Friday webinars. I am your host, Shelly Sanchez-Terrell, and every other Friday we host a webinar thanks to AmericanTESOL.com. American TESOL, we have different types of certifications, and we have actually quite a few people taking our certification courses right now because we offer them face-to-face and online. I am the instructor for teaching English with technology, but we also have courses for teaching children or young learners English. We have for teaching business English and also TESOL Advanced certification. And so you can find all that out at AmericanTESOL.com. If you want access to the recordings, we do allow anyone to come and attend their webinars. And we also realize that if you cannot come, then you might want to watch the recording instead. So if you go to our YouTube channel, which is YouTube/user/ATESOL, then you're able to find hundreds of these webinars on live and are able to learn from them. And below each YouTube video, you will also see tons of ways that you can access the bookmarks as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at comics. Comics are really great. So we're going to try and go through 2 points. So the first point is how to be able to teach with comics, and I will show you where you can get access to free comics online to show your students. You may want to download them as a PDF, and then you can always share them on the big screen projector, but when you have internet access, you'll have to download them. And even comic books that you can teach with that are free online. You can also print out these resources if you don't have access to a projector or you don't have access to a lot of technology. And then I want to show you different websites and even mobile apps that are free for students to create their own comics or for you to create a comic as a teaching material. So those are the different points that we will look at and some tips to share with that. Comics, I really like this quote, so I've updated the quote as well, and I think that it really shows why comics are so great, especially for language learners and those who struggle with literacy, because a comic book is very brain friendly. It breaks up information into different frames, or you may know it as panels, and with those little boxes you will see not only text, but you also see the illustration. So there's visual and text. There's also in a lot of comics you'll see emphasis on certain words. So we know, for example, bang with an exclamation mark. Then we understand, okay, that was very loud. That was, maybe what happened. So there's a lot of ways that comics really do help learners and language learners understand what's happening and going on. When we look at a comic, comics aren't simple. A lot of the language in a comic in some of our favorite comics, like superhero comics, if you read Spider-Man, if you read Batman, if you've seen any of those comics, there's actually very complex vocabulary. Also the subject matter. A lot of times you can see where students have science that they're looking at, because a lot of the superheroes were created through some kind of science behind it, and so to understand that can be quite difficult, or even to read some of that description. Like Spider-Man, it was a lab and there was a spider there, and it talks about chemical reactions and different types of science as well. And I think that's really great. So Maria Zampano points out that she uses graphic novels for her high school students. I think that's, and that's, we talk about that here in this particular webinar as well, because graphic novels work in the same way as comics in that they have a lot of visuals. they break up the learning into different sections, and it's sequency, so it builds off of the other. If you understand what's happening in the first panel, then you're going to understand the action. Graphic novels, some of them are in the tradition of the Japanese style that they came from, and so the reading, just to warn you, is a little bit different. If you're not using like an American version or a westernized version, the reading is different, I believe. At least when my niece used to read some of her graphic novels, but maybe Maria can let us know. Um, because usually it's left to right we read, and I think it might be a little bit different with the graphic novels. But graphic novels are really great as well. So let's take a look at places you can find free comics online. Comixology is a really great place. It's great for you to take a look, and that way, if your students do have computers, or they do have devices, they can read these in class. You can download them. These are all free comics, so you have a lot of different ways to. So if you wanted to have a class novel or anything like that, this might be a really good way to be able to do that. And then you can look by subject, you can look by area, and just search the key terms, and then you'll be able to find one that meets your needs. Now, they weren't made for language learners or for elementary. They're just free comics on Comixology. So you'll have to take a look at the language, kind of read some of it, just to make sure that it would be at the proper level for your students, and also to see whether or not it's interesting for your students. It's the kind of comic that is age appropriate for your students. A lot of them at Comixology aren't necessarily for kids, but there's kidscomics.com. And at Kids Comics, you can find some free ones. This is actually looking for a kid-friendly comic shop as well. So you can find a few free ones that you can access online. But these are physical comic books as well. So they'll even let you know where there's very inexpensive ones near a lot of different areas as well. What I like about Kids Comics is it has different comics by independent authors, and so you'll see some comic heroes that are maybe not necessarily the typical type of hero that you usually see. So here, this one is really nice. This one, the superhero here has Down syndrome and is a student that goes on these adventures with his superhero dad. So I really like how accessible those particular comics are as well. So you can find a lot more on Kids Comics that is young learner appropriate. So online, if you want to teach grammar, Grammarman comic is really great. Not only does he have different types of comics that are so well written, this is a teacher that teaches language learners in Thailand, and he does such an excellent job. His students have their own work on the website. He has a lot of different activities that or challenges that he gives students to do in comic form, and they can draw it and upload and send it to him. The other part is that he has some of these comics in a YouTube video. So that makes it even more fun and accessible because you have little videos to accompany these different types of grammar that you're sharing. So Grammarman is really awesome and amazing for language learners. The other one is gocomics.com/Kigtown. Now, these particular comics are with science, math, and animal. I mean, you learn a lot. So these are English. I mean, not only in English, but they also are comics that teach you some kind of science or math, or I mean, they teach kids about something. So here, this is one about the bee. It's well illustrated. I think this is really great because if you are teaching something that's difficult, like science, then it is really great when you can have a visual that's fun for students who feel really intimidated, or they feel like sometimes the science is so complicated and they're not able to really be able to understand it. But this makes it really fun for them. It illustrates them. Even by looking at the picture, we can tell that they're trying to talk about how hard bees work. And here we take a look and we know that this is the queen bee. And what is she doing? She's sitting on eggs. So there's a lot of ways that you can really help students with comics. You can help them by asking them questions about the visuals. And that way they're able to, before you even start reading, you can say, okay, what do you think this picture is showing? And they might say, oh, well, this is a queen bee, because they may have heard about that. And then say, well, what is she sitting on? And then they might come up with the idea of eggs. And then here, that's exactly what it talks about. It talks about the beehive containing as much as 60,000 bees. So it's a great way for them to be able to remember what they picture, but able to understand as well. And then there are instructables on how-tos. So there's even comics that give students explanations and instructions and steps for creating. These are some of my favorites. So students, they look at a comic to be able to create something. In this one, it's a soda bottle rocket. Another one here is for an underwater viewer. And then they can test these out. So they're learning science, they're learning math, they're learning language that focuses on instructions and completing directions. And if they don't get it right, they can always, try again. But this way they can actually see if they understood the instructions, because if they don't get it right, then that means that they have to go back and they have to review the instructions. My favorite in how-to, the series is called How-Toons. My favorite how-to is for students is how to make ice cream, and that's pretty easy. They don't need any kind of real big technology or anything. It's a lot of plastic bags and ice and different kind of food items, of course, but it's a lot of fun. Me and my students have created the ice cream quite a bit. If you're looking for websites that have individual comic strips, so there's Maria was talking about graphic novels, and so there are comics that will be as books. But there are also a lot of teachers have gone online and decided to make comic strips or just one-page comics. And so comicsenglish.com has more of those type of comics where it could be just like one panel or two panels, and students can find a quick lesson, like the difference between their, T-H-E-I-R, their, T-H-E-Y-R, apostrophe R-E, or their, T-H-E-R-E. And so they have different lessons like that, and some other ideas on how to teach comics. ZenPencils.com is free as well, and they have very colorful comics. I've used this with my freshman college students right now, and they take famous characters, and Zen Pencils illustrates it and has very, very simple language. And there's very little language as well. So this one even is good for beginners, pre-intermediate. Then there's Huffington Post, Larry Payros. He actually does comics on word origin. So students can learn vocabulary. They learn where the vocabulary came from, the history of that vocabulary and sayings, and then they're able to see the comic. So on this particular one, we can see that he is illustrating the history behind A Shame on You. He writes for the Huffington Post. He has a whole entire Pinterest full of these awesome comics that he's written about. So now let's get into your students making comics, because I think that comic creators are really great way to get students involved in their own learning and to be able to express to you what they've learned. And so I get my students to make comics all the time. These are free comic creators that are really great for students of a variety of ages. So you can see here, Peggy George had mentioned before, book creator. That was in the live 20 classroom webinar they shared. And so book creator is definitely one of them. It's a great way to make, if you want your students to do something bigger, like a comic book. You may want to start with a comic strip. That's what I get my students to do. And I always get my students to use make-believe comics. I'm going to show you. But the reason why I get them to make big make-believe comics is because you don't have to register. So they don't have to put their email or anything like that. All they have to do is go to make-believe comics, create the comic, and then just email me either the comic strip, or they can download it as a PDF or image, and then just send me that JPEG file, or they can send me the PDF of their comic. So I don't really like to get my students to sign up for a lot of stuff, and so that makes it easy. If they have a device, I've had students also use Friendstrip and Comics Head. Those are only mobile apps, but they are available on different platforms. So if you have an Android phone, students can download it for free. If you have an iOS device, students can download it for free. Friendstrip might even be available on Windows phones. Witty Comics, that's online. Storyboard, that's online. Pixton is online, is on the web. So all these three are on the web. Pixton is also mobile, and then Toonju is on the web as well. And you'll take a look and see what they look like. Makes Believe Comics just got a new makeover, so they've made it so much easier to be able to create wonderful, wonderful comics. Your student can put their name up here, and there's the author's name, and then the title of the comic, and then they add on the bottom are the characters, and here they can resize or move their characters around, and so they have lots of different options as well. And they can even decide how many panels they want to make, and that's up here, that's at the very top. So they've made this quite easy, more user friendly, and so it's really quick and easy for students to be able to make a comic. I've had students make a comic within 20 minutes, and they've been able to, just with instructions that I provided, basic instructions, they've been able to figure it out really fast, because I always have students jump ahead of me telling them instructions. I've had students do different things, like, for example, they've and I'll show you some examples in here as well, but sometimes they can make a comic out of the rules, or make a comic expressing, most recently I've had them express logical fallacies, how to argue more correctly. But there's a lot of ways they can use this. So one way that I've had them do this, and this is from one of the students, is to illustrate one of their readings or text in just a small section. So you could do this with an article. If you had a short article, they could, transform it in comic form. They don't take word for word. Instead, what they do is they either take the dialogue from the characters, or they take the key points and they put in their own idea. So here is from Pride and Prejudice. As we know, that is a very big novel. If you have something like a novel, then one of the ideas to get students each, and you don't have a lot of technology, you can have them use one comic creator, and then each student is in charge of one of the chapters, or any way that you want to divide that particular novel. And that way you have your students create, a comic for an entire novel. And once again, it's important that students do not follow it word for word. You're not getting them to transcribe. What you're trying to do is get them to put it in a more friendly, modern way that they understand it. And if they do it in their own words, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't violate copyright. But the most important part is that then you're able to see if they understand it, if it's in their own words. So she did this with Pixton. I allow my students to choose which kind of comic creator they want, and so Pixton is what she chose. And she did such a good job. We take a look at, when I am assessing this, I assess with the rubric, and I'll show you what that looks like. But and I believe on my webpage, I do have shellytarot.com/comics. I think or comic. See, there's the resources again. Then you'll be able to see a rubric that I use with my students. But I take a look at the background elements, and I assess them for that, whether the background elements match the conversation, the emotions on the faces. Does that match what the characters are saying? Do the characters look like, what is, and then also the grammar, and also the way the information flows. So all of that is part of the assessment. This is what TuneDo looks like. It's free. Another way that you can use another assignment or task for students is they can create dialogues. They can create dialogues either in a role play, like for example, a lot of times in the course book we do have role plays, so they can make it in comic form instead, and that could be fun for them. Another idea is for them to create dialogues from the characters. Even in history, they've had characters that they talk about. The most famous one, an example I use, is the Lincoln-Douglas debate. So they could actually make that into a comic where they have Lincoln, he talks or argues his points, and then Stephen Douglas argues his points. It was this big debate that was part of the, part of the whole debate as well. That made him president, Abraham Lincoln. So you can have them do that. They can even have blog and journal prompts this way. Make Believe's Comics has over 350 plus free printables. They're free. They're only one page. You can print them in black and white. They're very cool and wonderful, but you don't have to print them in color. So if you did want students to see this, and this could be part of, writing when they come in the beginning of class, or just any way to practice writing, then you could use this with students too. You can print them out. Make Believes allows you to. This is what FriendStrip looks like. And then students can create digital stories. The great thing about FriendStrip is that FriendStrip actually starts the story. So sometimes we want our students to be able to, create their own stories. But sometimes our students find that very overwhelming. Sometimes they need a little bit of brainstorming. So comic strip go ahead and they start the narrative off. The great thing is FriendStrip. FriendStrip makes it really easy to create a comic because students can upload their own pictures. They can add. Actually, my students have found FriendStrip to be the easiest way to create a comic that's really, really, really fast. Oh, thank you, Peggy. So Peggy, George says that the FriendStrip .com. So it was working a week ago, but I guess it's not working, the actual friendstrip.com website. So just make sure that it's still available in the App Store. I hope so, because this is one of the best comic creators I've ever seen. You can see it's really easy for kids, but my students have made FriendStrip comics with their mobile devices within like 5 or 10 minutes. That's how easy it is. Because if you only get them to use one, sometimes I get them to create sometimes they'll create their own writing prompt this way for their friends to complete. Sometimes they'll just create a comic that's really short, 3 frames, that talks about their day. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this. You can use it to be able to highlight grammar structures. So a lot of different comics will allow you to do this. Marvel used to have where you could create with comics, but now they've changed those features quite a bit. So I'm not sure if that still works out, but there's a lot of other comic creators that I've listed at shellyturtle.com/comic that will be able to use to do that. Phrase it. So this is not necessarily a comic creator, but you can use it that way, because what it does is it basically lets you add a speech bubble to any different picture you have. So some popular ones is to animate an object or an animal or even a pet, and you can add the little bubbles to be able to tell that story, or from their point of view. Or about their day, the pet's day while you were at school. So there's a lot of different ways that they can use that. They can create math problems this way as well. This one is from a blog that has several examples, and I encourage you to show that. Um, he used bit strips for schools, but that doesn't really exist anymore. But you can do this with a lot of the other different comic creators too. So the easiest way to do this is to get math problems that are already there that your students have to solve, that are maybe in some of their tests. And what you can do is just give each student a different math problem. They don't see each other's, and then have the student transform that into a comic, or visualize that into a comic, and then their peers have to solve that particular problem. And that's a really fun way for them to be able to answer word problems, but also to be able to understand and visualize what's happening in a word problem. Create political comics. So the other way that I get students to use Comic Creator is witty comics. And the reason why is because witty comics is really simple as well. You don't have to register or to send your email. Students just, click. It's so simple to use. Your students can figure this out in less than 5 minutes. It's so user friendly. They don't have a lot of options, so that's one thing. They only get 3 panels basically, but they can keep repeating those 3 panels. So if they do part 1, then they can, download that and then do part 2, and so on and so on. You can have students explore societal issues. I don't necessarily recommend strip generator. That's what this was made with, only because it's only black and white, which is good. That's easy to print out. But some of the comics that are displayed on the site are, they just let anyone create comics and they don't really filter. And they feature those comics. So sometimes people don't put the best words in those comics. There's where you can recreate a scene from history. So what students read about, they basically put it in comic form, or whatever they're reading is about. They summarize it in comic form. They can visualize lyrics in a song. This is the one by John Lennon, Imagine. And so they've turned the lyrics. And so that's a way to be able to understand music and songs. There's where you can make that as a writing every single day. It can be a reflection, and that idea is from Make Believe Comics. Make Believe Comics has had where you can have your students be able to reflect on the day. They basically, in comic form, let them know this particular lessons. They're letting parents and the teachers know what they learned in the day, what happened throughout the day. And so they do this in comic form, which is a fun way. Comics can even be used to express very difficult concepts. So very, very famous is Nick Sonis. He designed the first at Columbia University research dissertation. So his dissertation for his PhD was about comics, and he decided to do it in comic form. So recently he's shared some others who also around the world are taking on this idea. Recently, a female teacher, I think, from Canada, and I don't know what her particular comic form was, but she's been getting notoriety for her dissertation in comics as well, and being known as the first one in Canada to be able to do this as well. And then there's ways that you can bring your comics to life. And these are ways that not only you can have where you create it with pictures, or you create it with your own pictures, your own drawings, but that there are ways that you can get your comic characters to talk. What if you had a comic that you created that's really great for language learners? So that incorporates speaking and listening skills as well. And then there's ways to create video or animated comics. So the first one is comicshead.com. Now, to use the feature to add audio clips to your different characters, and you can draw with Comics Head, you can add your own pictures, and then they also have characters to choose from as well. With Comics Head, you can actually add a little audio clip. Now, if you want to publish it with the audio clip, that costs. But just to have the feature to be able to add the audio clip does not cost. You can test it out. You just won't be able to publish it. But I have students pass around, I have one iPad, my iPad, but you can have a regular tablet because it works on Android as well. And I have them create it on my iPad and pass it around the class. And then they can hear, for example, what the other characters, and then they build off of it. So each student has a frame that they're using. You can create selfie comic videos with lomix.co. That's for iOS and Android. So this is a video, and then you can see here how it turns it into comic form. It doesn't have to be with them in it. They can also have just, if they just want to create their own little cartoon that comes out, then they can do that as well. And they have access to, the stylized writing, and it looks like a comic as well. I recently found out DuckDuckMoose is one of my favorite app companies. You should look them up if you have an iOS device. DuckDuckMoose has incredible apps that are free for children, and so and students of various ages. They're very colorful. And one that I just found out is a superhero comic book maker. So students are able to choose the characters. They're able to animate the scenes with over 170 animated speakers, and they can also practice their speaking and listening skills as well as their reading and writing, because they're able to make the characters speak as well. It doesn't have a save feature. I will let you know that. So what that means is that it automatically, once you finish, it just kind of saves your comic. It doesn't actually have a save feature, but when you look at the library, you'll see it. So that did confuse me for a while. In my book Learning to Go, I do have some different ways that I've rubric, so you can understand how I grade. And things that are important when we talk about a comic is not only them meeting the requirements. So if you have any checklist requirements, such as they have certain vocabulary or grammar they have to use, or content, you want to grade for content. But in addition to that, you want to grade for also as well. So that's called required elements. And then the other part is the design and layout, to make sure that the images match, to make sure that none are too blurry. None of their selection of characters is hard to see, or the font's hard to see, or the captions. So the captions as well, and the dialogue bubbles, do they have everything within each space, or is it off the bubble? So these are all things that you want to take a look at when you are grading comics, and the grammar and everything as well. So thank you so much. I know I covered that a little bit quickly, but if you want to go and you want to take a look at the recording, that'll be available by tomorrow. And you can also be able to take a look in your, if you want, you can take a look as well at the different slides, and also the different ideas more in depth when you go to shellyterrell.com. At americantesol.com/blogger, we also have a lot of different other resources that we share, including the comics as well. And you'll see on